A man drank a shot of essential oils. This is what happened to his organs. DB, a 27-year-old man, was brought to the emergency department with severe confusion, uncontrollable vomiting, and breathing so rapid and deep that paramedics initially suspected a panic attack. But his heart rate was racing at 140 beats per minute. His temperature had spiked to 102 degrees, and when nurses tried to orient him, he couldn't remember his own address. He kept complaining about a loud ringing in his ears that wouldn't stop. What made this particularly puzzling was the complete absence of any obvious trigger. No fever suggesting infection, no trauma, no known drug use, and just hours earlier, he'd been completely fine. The only clue was his girlfriend's frantic insistence that he'd only taken natural medicine for a headache. But sometimes natural doesn't mean safe. And this is where we are now. DB lived with his girlfriend, LM, a self-described holistic wellness influencer, whose apartment resembled an apothecary shop, shelves lined with unlabeled glass bottles containing essential oils, tinctures, and herbal extracts. LM had built her entire identity around rejecting conventional medicine, frequently posting to her followers about how pharmaceuticals were toxic chemicals, while natural remedies were inherently safe and superior. She'd convinced herself that her intuitive knowledge of plants and oils made her more qualified than doctors to treat everyday ailments. That evening, DB had come home from a long gym session, complaining of muscle soreness and a mild headache. Instead of suggesting he take an over-the-counter pain reliever, LM saw this as another opportunity to prove her natural medicine expertise. She confidently reached for one of her unmarked bottles, a clear liquid with a strong, minty smell, and prepared what she called a detox shot. She poured roughly a teaspoon of the oil into a small glass, assuring DB it would eliminate toxins and reduce inflammation better than any pharmacy drug. Her confidence was absolute. After all, if it came from nature, how dangerous could it be? DB hesitated when LM handed him the glass. The liquid had an almost medicinal smell that reminded him of muscle rubs, and something about swallowing a pure essential oil felt wrong. But LM had treated dozens of his minor ailments over their 2-year relationship: stomach issues with ginger oil, anxiety with lavender, cuts with tea tree oil, and he'd never had a serious problem. He trusted her research, her passion, her certainty that nature provided better solutions than Big Pharma. Around 8 p.m, he swallowed the liquid quickly, grimacing at the immediate burning sensation in his mouth and throat. LM assured him the discomfort meant it was working, drawing out toxins and inflammation. For the first hour, DB actually felt vindicated in his trust. No immediate catastrophe, no obvious side effects. He even felt slightly proud for choosing the natural route over popping pills. But what neither of them realized was that LM had grabbed the wrong bottle. Instead of the diluted peppermint oil she intended, she'd given him pure oil of wintergreen, 98% methyl salicylate. That single teaspoon contained roughly 7,000 milligrams of salicylate, equivalent to swallowing 21 adult aspirin tablets at once. His body was already beginning to convert that methyl salicylate into salicylic acid, and the chemical was starting to interfere with his cellular metabolism in ways that would soon become impossible to ignore. Around 10 p.m, 2 hours after ingestion, DB began feeling nauseous. LM reassured him this was part of the detox process, his body purging toxins. By 11 p.m, the nausea had evolved into waves of vomiting, and DB noticed a persistent ringing in his ears that seemed to be getting louder. His breathing had become noticeably deeper and faster, though he wasn't consciously trying to breathe differently. By midnight, DB was sweating profusely, despite the air conditioning, and his thinking felt increasingly foggy. When LM asked him simple questions, he found himself struggling to focus on her words. The vomiting continued, leaving him dehydrated and weak, but what alarmed him most was the way his body seemed to be breathing on its own, deep, rapid breaths that he couldn't control. Around 1 a.m., 5 hours after the detox shot, DB tried to stand up to use the bathroom and immediately collapsed. His legs wouldn't support him, his vision was blurry, and he couldn't form coherent sentences. LM finally abandoned her conviction that this was normal detox and called 911. The paramedics found DB confused, hyperventilating, and running a fever, with a heart rate that wouldn't slow down despite rest and cooling measures. This brought him to the emergency room, where our story began. Before we continue, if you're enjoying the sort of content we're making, it would mean the world to me if you were to go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Thanks, and back to the video. In the ER, doctors found a young man in obvious distress. His temperature was 102.8 degrees Fahrenheit. His heart rate was 140 beats per minute, and he was taking 30 breaths per minute, twice the normal rate. His breathing pattern was particularly striking, deep, laboured respirations that suggested his body was desperately trying to correct some internal imbalance. When doctors tested his reflexes, they were hyperactive, and his mental status fluctuated between agitation and confusion. Blood work revealed something unexpected. His blood pH was 7.52, significantly alkaline when it should have been around 7.4. This alkalosis suggested he was blowing off too much carbon dioxide through hyperventilation. But the question was why his brain was driving such aggressive breathing. His lactate level was elevated, indicating his cells weren't processing oxygen efficiently, and there were early signs that his kidneys were struggling to keep up with some unknown toxic burden. The combination of altered mental status, hypothermia, unexplained hyperventilation, and metabolic derangement pointed to some form of poisoning. But from what? LM insisted he'd only taken natural oils, ruling out obvious culprits like acetaminophen or street drugs. The mystery deepened when doctors noted that DB's pupils were normal, his blood sugar was stable, and he showed no signs of infection. Something was systematically disrupting his body's basic cellular functions, but the smoking gun remained hidden. The emergency team began working through possibilities. Sepsis could cause confusion, fever, and rapid breathing, but DB's white blood cell counts was normal, and he had no obvious source of infection. A psychiatric emergency might explain agitation and hyperventilation, but wouldn't account for the fever, metabolic abnormalities, and progressive neurologic decline. Substance intoxication remained high on the list, but standard toxicology screens came back negative for common substances like alcohol, opiates, cannabinoids, and other illicit items. The doctors expanded their search, testing for less common toxins. Meanwhile, DB's condition continued deteriorating. His confusion deepened, and blood gases now showed he was developing metabolic acidosis alongside the respiratory alkalosis, creating a mixed acid-base disturbance that suggested cellular poisoning. The breakthrough came when doctors specifically ordered a salicylate level, a test for aspirin-like compounds. The result was shocking: 85 milligrams per deciliter. Normal therapeutic levels for aspirin therapy range from 15 to 30 milligrams per deciliter. Anything over 30 milligrams per deciliter is considered toxic. DB's level of 85 milligrams per deciliter was in the severe toxicity range, potentially lethal. But how? he hadn't taken aspirin. The answer lay in that natural oil. Oil of wintergreen is nearly pure methyl salicylate, which the body rapidly converts to salicylic acid, the same compound that makes aspirin toxic in overdose. LM's single teaspoon of natural medicine had delivered the salicylate equivalent of a massive aspirin overdose. DB was suffering from salicylate poisoning, and if doctors didn't act fast, this was what would happen next. To understand why DB was deteriorating so rapidly, you need to understand how salicylates attack cellular metabolism. In normal circumstances, cells use oxygen to produce ATP, the energy currency that powers every biological process. This happens inside mitochondria through a precisely controlled process called oxidative phosphorylation. Salicylates poison this system by uncoupling oxidative phosphorylation. The mitochondria still consume oxygen, but instead of producing useful ATP, all that energy gets released as heat. This explains DB's hypothermia. His cells were literally burning fuel without capturing the energy, like a car engine revving in neutral while overheating. The salicylates also directly stimulated his brain's respiratory center, forcing him to hyperventilate. This caused respiratory alkalosis. His blood pH rose because he was blowing off too much carbon dioxide. But simultaneously, his poisoned mitochondria were producing excess lactate and other organic acids, creating metabolic acidosis. His body was caught in a biochemical tug-of-war between alkalosis and acidosis. As salicylate levels rose, the drug crossed into his brain tissue, causing direct neurotoxicity. This explained his confusion, agitation, and eventual stupor. The persistent tinnitus, ringing in his ears, occurred because salicylates are directly toxic to the delicate hair cells in the inner ear. Meanwhile, his kidneys were struggling to clear the salicylate while managing the acid-base chaos, creating a vicious cycle where toxicity bred more toxicity. The medical team immediately began aggressive treatment. They started intravenous fluids to combat dehydration from vomiting and sweating, and began alkalinizing his urine with sodium bicarbonate. Making his urine more basic helps the kidneys eliminate salicylates more rapidly. They placed him on continuous cardiac monitoring, since salicylate toxicity can cause dangerous arrhythmias. DB was transferred to the intensive care unit for closer monitoring. Over the first few hours, his vital signs slowly stabilized. His heart rate dropped from 140 to 110 beats per minute. His temperature began trending downward, and the alkalinization therapy appeared to be helping his kidneys clear the salicylate. His repeat salicylate level at 4 hours showed a slight decrease to 78 milligrams per deciliter, still dangerously high, but moving in the right direction. For a moment, it looked like aggressive supportive care might be enough to pull him through the crisis. The ICU team cautiously optimized. If they could maintain his kidney function and keep his acid-base balance stable, DB might avoid the most severe complications of salicylate poisoning. But the story wasn't done with DB yet. 8 hours into his ICU stay, DB took a dramatic turn for the worse. His breathing became increasingly laboured, and chest X-rays revealed bilateral pulmonary infiltrates. His lungs were filling with fluid. This wasn't heart failure, it was non-cardiogenic pulmonary edema, a direct toxic effect of severe salicylate poisoning, where the drug damages the delicate barrier between lung capillaries and air sacs. Pulmonary edema from salicylate toxicity is particularly dangerous because it creates a vicious cycle. As the lungs fill with fluid, oxygen levels drop, making the cellular metabolism problems worse. The body responds by breathing even harder, but the mechanical ventilation needed to support breathing can worsen the lung injury. Meanwhile, DB's mental status declined further as salicylates continued damaging his brain tissue. The medical team recognized they were losing the race against the poison. DB's salicylate level had plateaued around 75 milligrams per deciliter despite alkalinization therapy, suggesting his kidneys couldn't keep pace with the ongoing absorption and redistribution of the drug. With pulmonary edema developing and neurologic function declining, they made the decision to pursue emergency hemodialysis, directly filtering the salicylate from his blood using an artificial kidney machine. The hemodialysis procedure took 6 hours, during which specialized filters gradually removed the salicylate from DB's bloodstream. His post-dialysis level dropped to 32 milligrams per deciliter, still elevated, but out of the immediately life-threatening range. Over the following 48 hours, his pulmonary edema slowly resolved, his mental status cleared, and his acid-base balance normalized. DB spent 5 days in the ICU and another 3 days on the general ward before discharge. While he avoided permanent organ damage, the experience left him with temporary hearing changes. The tinnitus persisted for several weeks, and audiometry tests showed mild high-frequency hearing loss that gradually improved over months. His kidney function returned to normal, but follow-up testing revealed subtle changes that suggested he'd been very close to acute kidney injury. The most significant long-term impact wasn't physical, but psychological. DB had trusted completely in natural medicine's safety, and that single teaspoon of oil had nearly killed him. He learned that natural doesn't mean harmless. Many of the most potent poisons in human history come directly from plants. Concentrated essential oils, in particular, can deliver pharmaceutical-grade doses of active compounds, with none of the safety testing or dosing guidelines that govern conventional medicines. DB's case illustrates how confidence can become dangerous when it replaces knowledge. LM's certainty about natural medicine's safety wasn't based on understanding the pharmacology of the compounds she was dispensing. It was based on the assumption that natural equals safe. But chemistry doesn't care about origins. Methyl salicylate is methyl salicylate, whether it's synthesized in a pharmaceutical plant or extracted from wintergreen leaves. The most insidious aspect of this poisoning was the delayed onset. DB felt fine for 2 hours after ingestion, reinforcing both his and LM's belief that the treatment was working. By the time symptoms appeared, he'd already absorbed a potentially lethal dose. This delayed toxicity makes concentrated essential oils particularly dangerous for internal use. The damage is done long before the consequences become apparent. The human body has remarkable resilience, but it also has limits. When we exceed those limits, good intentions and natural sources provide no protection from basic biochemistry. Please be responsible and stay safe. Take care, and see you in the next video.